And now, the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, in conversation with opinion columnist for the Washington Post, Jonathan Capehart.
Wow, the clock is already ticking down, Governor Moore of the great state of Maryland. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but you were an intern in Baltimore Mayor Kurt Schmoke's office. What did you learn while you were there? What did you do? What did you learn? And how are you using that knowledge in your position as governor?
What I learned is, first thing a lot of interns learn is like, where's the coffee machine and where do you pick things up for folks? But I tell you, it was really great for me because it was my first time getting a chance to see city government and seeing how it works, how it doesn't, to see the broad ambitions, but oftentimes the extraordinary limitations if you don't have the right partnerships that are established in place. But also, I think one of the biggest things that I learned and I got from that experience was, I found a mentor who has been a guide and a friend for not just my entire professional career, but for my entire life, where literally I don't think there's a single major decision that I have made that I have not called up Mayor Schmoke and gotten his thoughts and gotten his advice on it. So I got a lot of professional things out of it, but really what I got out of it was a personal connection that is going to last a lifetime.
But in terms of policy, now I know you're a governor, there are lots of mayors in here, but how are you using that knowledge to help localities in your state? Of course, I'm thinking of Baltimore, but how are you applying that knowledge?
Well, I think I ran for office having never run for office before in my life. I know it's kind of odd if you're like, you're a governor, you've never literally run for office before.
I mean, we've seen that happen.
We've seen it happen. I'm hoping mine's going to turn out a little better.
But I worked for someone who ran for mayor who had not run for elected office before, and he was wildly successful.
Yes,
Mayor Bloomberg.
No, that's right.
Just to put a point on it.
That's right.
But go on, I interrupt.
No, but I think when I draw back from the lessons that I've taken, where it's my first time being in elected office. It's not my first time being a chief executive. It's not my first time running large organizations. I've led soldiers in combat. I've led a successful startup business. I've also led one of the largest poverty fighting organizations in this country. And honestly, a lot of those lessons that I took from those experiences were great preparation for what I'm now doing as a chief executive of the state. I take a look at the work that we did over in Robin Hood, where really exclusively what we focused on was find it, fund it, and scale it, right? A pretty simple equation. Find what works, make sure it's getting the resources that it needs, and then make sure it can touch more people than it can touch when you first initially found it, right? And in many ways, being a governor is very simple, and it's very similar, where you are working in partnership with your local jurisdictions. It is true, the people, as I said, the people who are closest to the challenges are the ones who are close to the solutions. They're just hardly ever at the table, right? So if you can come up with a new frame for the way the state government works, that can actually be close to the people, identify the things that are working, because the solutions are there, they just oftentimes don't get the shine. And then making sure that you're being smart and diligent and thoughtful about how state resources can then use those type of things that are working and scale and touch more people. And so in many ways, the foundation that I had when I decided to run for governor, even though I'm actually learning as the days go by, was probably the best preparation I could have gotten to be the 63rd governor for the state of Maryland.
So given all of that, everything that you just said, you realize I'm trying to get you to tell everyone here what you were telling me backstage about an initiative that has either just started, is about to start. Could you please help a brother out?
Absolutely.
And tell them, because this is a very interesting and innovative plan that you have.
It's exciting, and it's going to be the first time that we've seen in our nation's history that a state is actually going to take on this type of initiative. And really what the focus is we're going to have a state-led initiative that is going to be a place-based investment strategy. And what we mean by that essentially is this. I don't understand how we were looking at our budget. And if you look at the balance sheet does not reflect our ambitions. But the other thing is the balance sheet does not reflect realities. And what I mean by that is you have this almost like peanut butter politics thing that happens with state balance sheets, where it's like everybody's going to get a little bit and everybody gets this and everybody gets that. The problem is that's not how things show themselves in neighborhoods. That's not how things show themselves in communities. And you have to be able to follow the data. And I say as a leader, I am data-driven and heart-led. Right? I wear my heart on my sleeve and I acknowledge that. But I don't move without data. And the data in the state of Maryland is very clear about what are the most challenged neighborhoods, the most challenged communities that we have in our state. Right? Urban, rural, and suburban. Follow the data. And so what we're going to be doing in partnership with our philanthropic partners, in partnership with our local jurisdictions and our mayors and our county executives, in partnership with the private sector, is basically saying, take a look at the most challenged census tract zip code areas, and then what would it look like if you flooded those with resources? What would it look like if you actually took those neighborhoods that have been chronically and historically neglected and said, we're actually going to prioritize them, unapologetically, about everything, the way we look at transportation assets, the way we look at housing, the way we look at food security, the way we look at educational systems and schools. If you could take a look at the way we look at economic advancement and incentivizing jobs and employment inside those areas, what would it look like if you could prioritize the places that have been under-prioritized? And so that's something that Maryland is going to be, that we're excited about, that we're going to be leaning on, that we're going to be announcing some stuff very soon. And we're just looking forward to working in partnership with all of you to make it happen.
So the policy wonk in me is like, all right, this sounds smart, it sounds great, but then the political wonk in me is like, how are you going to deal with the political pushback from the Jiffy Caucus? So you were talking about peanut butter politics. Well, there are a lot of people out there who like the peanut butter aspect of public policy. So and you said you're going to do this unapologetically.
Yeah.
So what's your response to why are you giving it to them? What about us? We've got problems too.
I think you have to be, if we lead with data, we're going to come up with the right conclusions. And that's really what we want to show people is that, this is not emotive, right? We're not saying this because it sounds good. We're just following the data. And the data is very clear that we are going to put an inordinate amount of resources healing instead of putting those resources towards building. And that cannot be the way that we focus our budget, and it cannot be the way that we have our politics work. And I think the other big thing that we're going to be doing, and this is frankly something that's worked so far in our first 10 months. We introduced 10 bills into our first legislative session. Not only did we go 10 for 10 on all the bills that we introduced, and that included things like raising a minimum wage of $15, making permanent child tax credit, having an enhanced earned income tax credit. Maryland is now the first state in this country that has a service year option for all of our high school graduates. Maryland is now the first state in the country that gives a pathway for both dental and health care for all members of the National Guard. I mean, we got some very big things done. We went 10 for 10, but we went 10 for 10 bipartisan. We got Democrat and Republican votes on every single one of the initiatives that we pushed. And the big thing that we did was we just went directly to the people. Have them make your case for you. Because we knew that when we came on board, again, and one of the nice things about not being in politics, we were not the establishment choice, right? We weren't the person that was tapped by someone to say, you should run for governor. In fact, I had more people come to saying, you should not run for governor. But what we just decided to do then is say, we just made our case to the people. And we ended up winning with more individual votes than anyone who's ever run for governor in the history of the state of Maryland. And so that's just the way we're planning on governing, where we're going to work in partnership with all of our partners and the Jiffy Caucus. I like that. And to make sure that everyone knows they're going to be seen and they're going to be heard. Yet at the same time, we're going to follow the data. We're going to go where the data leads us. And we're going to go directly to the people and have them be your advocates.
In your answer, you talked about transportation, and I understand the Red Line in Baltimore is very important to you. Yes. Talk about the Red Line and its importance.
So, I mean, you cannot have economic mobility if you don't have physical mobility. period. All right, you could place all the job placement things all you want, but if it takes you an hour and a half to go a mile and a half because of a lack of public transportation assets, then what have you done and what have you created? We had plans that had gone on for a decade to create a red line, which is basically the first time that you would have east-west transit taking place within the city of Baltimore and the Baltimore region. My predecessor decided that, that the money should be returned to the federal government as if we didn't need it, and I'm still wondering, like, who was the we? Because we really could have used that capital. And so one of the first things that we did when we came on board, I said, you know, respectfully, we're putting it back on track. And so we prioritized making sure that the red line is going to be built, and the red line will be built in our time. And we're going to be working, in partnership with the federal government. And again, I want to give a big shout out to the Biden administration, because I want to be clear. When we talk about what we're doing with the red line, if you don't have a bipartisan infrastructure act, if you don't have the kind of partnerships that we have in Washington, all these things sound like great ideas, but become very complicated to make happen. And so we've got an extraordinary partner inside the White House right now. And the thing that is now going to happen is it's not just going to be something that's going to increase physical mobility. It's going to be an economically sound way of actually increasing transportation assets, because we have to be able to focus on making sure we're getting cars off of the road and coming up with more mass transit options for people to be able to pursue and to be able to take advantage of. But in addition to that, it creates this measurement of closeness and allows us to start doing the transit-oriented development and investments that are going to be necessary for us to really push forward into the future.
As is your way, we've got 35 seconds left, but I'm going to go rogue, and I'm going to ask you one more question, and we're going to go a little bit over time.
Okay.
One of the things you were most proud of when you ran for governor was that you went everywhere in the state. You went to, quote unquote, red districts, red counties, and blue counties with the same message. For the urbanites in the room, what have you learned from talking to folks in rural communities? What should the urbanites in the room know about rural communities?
That's a good question. I remember when, in fact, the first visit that I took as governor was to a place called Lonaconing over in Western Maryland. And they were having a water crisis, so they were having a boil water advisory. So I went out there to go spend some time in the community. And I remember the mayor, a guy named Mayor Coburn, who I've become pretty close friends with. He said to me, "Governor, do me a favor, turn 360 degrees." So I turned 360 degrees. He said, "The only guarantee I can make you is you didn't see a Democrat in 5 miles of anywhere you just went." he said, "But I tell you what," he said, "you're the first governor that's been here since 1996. 96. The thing that I think people want more than anything else is they just want to be seen. They just want to feel like you're willing to show up, right? And now it's interesting, because I know that with all of my colleagues in the legislature, both Democrat and Republican, they know, we will talk and listen to anybody. We're not going to agree on everything. That's fine. But the only thing that I ask is that if we disagree on a Monday, can we come back on a Tuesday and figure out if there's something else we can work on? It's the only ask I have, right? And I think the thing that oftentimes there's this idea of a frustration that people have about rural communities, and they're just disconnected. But actually, a lot of their frustration about not being seen is valid, and it's true. When you have a fact that a governor hasn't shown up in Lonaconing since 1996, Mayor Coburn's frustration is valid. So I think that if we're just willing to show up, and we're willing to plead our case, and we're willing to hear theirs, I think we're going to come to a place where we can have a much greater level of not just understanding, but a much greater level of progress, where the progress can be universally felt, and where it doesn't feel like if this group gets this, then that means by definition this group loses. And I think if we can make that argument, the same way we're making the argument where I'm going out to Western Maryland, going out to Eastern Shore, talking about why we're investing in Baltimore. And you got to make that argument. But explain to them that, guys, this is not a zero-sum game we're playing in right now. And in fact, the only zero-sum outcome is if we keep on playing around with this idea that in order to win, it means by definition some must lose, and that means lose repeatedly. We can address that. I think we're going to have a much better conclusion.
You are the first black governor of Maryland. You are the third black governor in the history of the United States. You are the 63rd governor of Maryland. You are Governor Wes Moore. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you.